Welcome to That Anita Live, the talk show dedicated to providing emotional healing through sharing to help you create a happier life. I'm Anita, your host, and this week we're going to take a deep dive into adolescent mental health. The number of suicides among children and teens increases every year, but no one seems to know why. From Florida to Ohio to right here in our own backyard, the DC metro area, children as young as 8 are committing suicide. And I feel it's time we move this from being a private household problem to a community effort of prevention. I have in studio with me an associate professor in the Psychiatry Department at Georgetown University Medical Center. Dr. Breland-Noble is a recognized expert in adolescent depression. She currently leads multiple research teams, including being the project director of the AAKOMA project, the African American Knowledge Optimized for mindfully healthy adolescents. Welcome, Dr. Alfiee, to the show.
Thank you.
Thank you for coming down to That Anita Live.
My pleasure.
First, let's find out a little bit about Dr. Alfiee.
Okay.
Why did you go into mental health?
So I grew up in an area that was not very racially diverse.
Okay.
And it's probably about 20% African American, maybe 25% Filipino, and the rest of the community was not people of color. And I remember as a child encountering a lot of my friends of different races who struggled with things. And I don't think we had a label for it then. I certainly didn't. And I certainly didn't have a psychiatric illness label or a mental health label or a mental illness label to put on it. I just knew people were struggling. I happened to have 2 parents at home who were very loving, very supportive, and who were able to engage me, and I could talk to them, especially my mother, pretty much about anything.
Wow.
But I knew I had friends who couldn't do that
Yes.
for various reasons. And so I think that really was sort of the thing that sparked the interest. So by the time I got to college and decided what I was going to do for training and went through school, I have a godmother who is an early childhood development professor.
Wow.
And she and I would talk a lot. And so I think she was the person who really helped me solidify this idea that I had this interest in helping people. I've always been a helper. And how I could turn that into a career. And that's how I decided to go into studying mental illness and really trying to be helpful and provide clinical care, particularly for teenagers, because I can remember what it's like to be a teenager. Those years are rough on young people, especially now. So I think that was what did it for me.
And you went to NYU?
I did.
For?
So I went to Howard for undergrad. I went to NYU for a master's.
Notice, y'all, how I was trying to skip the HBCU.
We can't skip the HBCUs. I love
Virginia
Howard.
State in the house over here. So, all right.
I love all my HBCUs.
HU.
Yes, HU, you know.
Okay.
So I went to HU for undergrad. I got a master's at NYU. I have a doctorate from Wisconsin, and I have a second master's from the medical school at Duke. A lot of work. A lot of work.
Overqualified.
Yeah, totally. Yeah. Thank you, though.
So, suicide among youth.
Yes.
How is it that we've even gotten to youth considering suicide an option?
So I think, I have a colleague, his name is Dr. Sean Joe. He's one of the leading suicidologists in the country for Black people. He really understands suicide in Blacks. And I give Dr. Joe credit where credit is due. He's at Washington University in St. Louis. I think what I've learned from him and from studying this issue, because I'm a depression researcher, and among the causes or things that contribute to suicide, depression is at the top. There are other things that contribute to people not deciding, but going that route and contribute to suicidal ideation or thoughts of suicide. But one of the leading is depression. So I think our young people consider depression as an option, which I wouldn't want to label it as an option, but I think it comes to mind often because our young people don't have coping skills to think of other ways to deal with what they're experiencing. Particularly for those of us who are of color, Black folks, we don't really have a language that we use, in common parlance and in talking to each other to describe what's going on with us when we feel depressed. And so if the adults don't have a language, the kids and the teenagers don't have a language. And I think because they don't have a language, I think they grasp for what feels quick. I don't even know if it's the easiest. It's just it feels like a quick solution. And I think for younger children, they don't even necessarily conceptualize that it's permanent, right? I think they think.
Really?
I do. I think that, I'm not saying that children are ignorant. I'm saying that developmentally, it may not occur to them, like, if I do this, there is no coming back from this. And so I think it becomes a temporary solution to a treatable problem. right? So if depression is the issue, depression is treatable.
Because they only think about it up to it being an option. They don't think about anything that happens after that.
I could not have said it better. That's exactly right.
Because I remember 8 and 10 and 12, and I remember them as great years.
Yeah.
Being outside, playing.
Yes.
I never thought of suicide as, are they more exposed to it now, or?
Well, I would say that the levels of depression among young people, so when we look at the statistics, like the data shows about 10% of young people across the board, regardless of race, are experiencing symptoms associated with depression. Crying spells, change of eating habits, change of sleeping habits, hanging around different people, they stop caring about things. I think what we don't necessarily know for our young people is what is it that pushes them to the point that they think, well, if my life is over, I don't have to deal with this anymore. But I do think, as you said earlier, that's what they're thinking. They're thinking, if I just am not here, I don't have to deal with this. So, and I hear that a lot from my patients, my young patients. I treat all ages, but primarily I treat teenagers and a little bit younger and tweens. And that's what you will hear them say. If Dr. Alfiee, if I just wasn't here, I wouldn't have to feel this. So I think for them, I wouldn't say that TV gives them the idea, but I would say that they're exposed to so much more that even before they're depressed, that the stuff is sort of already in their brain and sort of out there floating in the world. So that then becomes an option out of many options, because they've seen lots of different things, and suicide becomes the thing that feels most immediate and sort of the most direct. This is the most direct path to ending my pain.
Right, okay, but the path, depression is in that path.
Yes.
Well, what happens before depression?
So lots of things. So depression has hereditary components, right? We can all, and I always encourage families when they come see me, let's talk about family history. And invariably what comes up is grandma or grandpa or auntie or great aunt or somebody in that lineage struggled with depression. It's just that nobody labeled it depression. They say, yeah, well, periodically she would just get blue and nobody knew what it was. Or sometimes there's this old movie Soul Food where they had the uncle and he was in the room with the movie. Well, okay, I'm sorry, I won't call it a movie. That's date myself. But you remember the uncle was in the room, he would never come out.
Yes.
When I saw that, I was like, oh, he's depressed. That's depression. That's what it looks like. That's how it manifests itself, but nobody had a label for it. That was just Uncle Joe, and you just leave Uncle Joe in the room. You don't bother Uncle Joe.
That's how he is.
Right, that's how he is. So that's what I think young people see, and they don't have a label for it, because we don't have a label for it because of the stigma that is associated with mental illness. So I think for our young people, it's these genetic components, the hereditary components. I think for a lot of young people, particularly and disproportionately young people of color, trauma. They're exposed to so many more things so much earlier. Yeah. And if the trauma doesn't heal, depression can set in.
What are some examples of those traumas?
So sexual abuse, physical abuse, even if it's not that serious, having a parent who's deployed in the military who comes back, who has their own mental health problems and they're withdrawn.
PTSD.
So that's right, they're dealing with post-traumatic stress disorder. They become withdrawn, they're withdrawn from the kids. It negatively impacts the ability to attach and be together. So you don't have that warm parent because mom or dad is struggling.
Divorce?
Divorce can impact the kids. So there are all these things that, trauma is not just the extremes, right? The physical abuse, the sexual abuse. There are many other things. It can be, for some of our young people, it can be a breakup with somebody that they love, right? That they're passionate about. They don't have a process for it. It can be pressure, like a lot of pressure from families. I tell parents all the time, you got to back off these kids a little bit. So straight A's, if it's not straight A's, it's not good enough. I hear kids say that stuff all the time. I've had young people come in and talk to me about they want to major in, art, but parents are demanding it be engineering. Yes. Or I had a young lady tell me a few weeks ago, or a mentor tell me that one of her students came in and said, I got an A-. I can't go home with that.
Wow.
Yes, right, straight A's, it needs to be solid A's. It can, straight A's or A+. A- is not good enough. And this was a black family. They weren't African American, but it was a black family. And so those kinds of pressures, unchecked and without the ability to cope, that's the kind of stuff that can lead to depression. If the depression goes on long enough, I think a person sometimes can feel like my only way out is to just not be here anymore.
Wow. What about the entertainment industry? Because we like to blame movies.
Yeah.
We like to blame TV.
Yeah, reality TV, yeah.
And we like to blame social media.
Yes.
Do they have viable parts?
Yes, absolutely they have viable parts. Because I think what they introduce is a lot of information that our young people are unprepared to manage. So for example, I tell parents all the time, I think about my teenage patients, anybody under the age of 14, 15, they don't need to be watching reality TV, right? And so around the kids that I treat mostly young people of color, all those reality shows, right? Especially the ones with the young women who are behaving in all kinds of horrible ways. So I won't name check any, but this is what the kids like to watch. My kids aren't allowed to watch any of that.
Where they're actually fighting.
Yes, physically.
Yes.
Physically.
Yes.
And that then propels them, the worse the behavior, for some of our young ladies, that propels them to stardom, right? There's one that all the kids love right now.
Yes.
She's a superstar. And all she did on reality TV literally was get into fist fights. And so it's being exposed to that, it desensitizes kids
Very
to
much
it,
so.
right?
Quickly.
So they start thinking this is how you're supposed to behave. So when you're angry, you don't take a step back and talk about it with the person, or you don't walk away to cool off. You just, right? You ready to
Dukes up.
That's it.
Turned up.
Knuck if you buck. That's what they say back in the day, so they're ready to do that. So I think there's a part, but I think parents and guardians and loved ones and the adults in our young people's lives have a part to play too. Don't let them watch it. And if you feel compelled to, you watch it with them so you can have a conversation about, well, she got angry at her. Why do you think she jumped on her like that? Or what would you do if you were in that situation, to give them some skills to process? So of course it has a part to play, but I think there are ways to mediate that. We can help our young people process those things, but it starts with, if they're younger, they don't need to be watching it at all.
Because I made a remark one day at work that a lot of the pictures that are on social media now, if they were magazine covers, when I was growing up, they would have a brown wrapper.
Yes.
They'd be on the top shelf.
That's right, where you couldn't get to,
Right.
You could barely see them. You could see the bottom corner. Yes.
And they would have a brown wrapper.
True.
Where
True.
those that were too young would
True.
believe they couldn't reach it,
Yes.
and they didn't have access to the images.
Yes.
But magazine covers today, when you walk through the grocery store,
Yes.
children have no place to be
No.
children anymore.
No, they don't. I think so. And I think that's a big part of the problem, is that they're exposed to too much too early. But I also think part of the problem is that if it's there, we can't necessarily shield them from it, but we can teach them how to process. And I think that's a part of it, is that we don't teach our young people how to process. We've internalized, many of us as adults, young adults, middle-aged adults, older adults, we've internalized some of that. And so we don't give our young people a language, and we don't say, that's not okay, right? And I think that's the part of the problem. We don't talk to them to help them manage it.
Talk to them to help them manage it. I know some adults that don't talk to each other to manage issues.
Amen.
Don't move. We'll be right back to talk about coping skills and how to help young adults manage pressure.
Yes.
What if I told you that you could stop the negative tape from playing inside your head? What if, with 7 simple steps, you could leave the pain of the past behind and live every day as your true, authentic self? It is possible, and you can do it. The ebook, 7 Simple Steps to Beat Emotional Baggage, How to Become Whole, Healed, Healthy, and Happy, shares how to resolve emotional baggage and feel free to live true to your own personality, spirit, and character. Transform negative thinking into positive thinking and become equipped to boldly face your past and resolve emotional pain. Get your free copy at thatanitalive.com/ebook.
And we're back with Dr. Alfiee talking about adolescent mental health, getting into pressures.
Yes.
What pressure? Let's talk about it in the age groups. Okay, let's do children, say 12 and under, and then that teenage, and then college, and maybe just out of college. Yeah.
Well, I love the concept of breaking it up like that. I think for the younger ones, a lot of it has to do with friendships. It's who's being nice to me today, who's not being nice to me today. Little girls can be mean. They can be vicious, even in elementary school. So I can remember in our family members who remain nameless, struggling with bullying in preschool.
Whoa.
And yes, and really having to help the family and parents work through how to help that child manage bullying and teaching the child how to stand up for him or herself. So at that age, I think it really is a lot to do with peers, because if they're not, unless they're at home with mom or dad all day, if they're in any kind of school situation, whether it's, daycare, preschool or whatever, going into elementary school, then a lot of what they're encountering is peers. This is pressure from peers. So of course, all of this across the age groups, we're just going to put on the shelf some of the things that we know can be pressure. So sexual abuse, physical abuse, those kinds of things. I think those go without saying. I think once you move into preteen, sort of 11 to 13-year-olds, the friendships piece becomes even more prominent, right? So that's really who they want to engage. That's really where they derive their sense of self-worth from. That's really who they want to impress. And so at that age, the pressures are still around friends, but it's more intensified because they have other mechanisms at this age. Forget elementary school. By the time they hit that age, there's social media, right? So you have 11 and 12 and 13-year-olds with iPhones, or whatever the equivalent Android phones, whatever
Android,
they are,
Samsung,
any kind of phone.
It is.
And it can be mean on social media. So you get into that as early as late elementary, early junior high, middle school, right? So those are some of the pressures. When you get a little older, you talk about teenagers, sort of 12 to say 18, end of middle school, going into high school, and through high school, is a whole new set of pressures, right? So there's academic pressures. There are pressures around fitting in. There are pressures around sexuality, trying to figure out what is that for me. So for our LGBTQ young people, that's around the time it starts to emerge. Now they already knew, but this is when it starts, there's a possibility for it to become public. Like, should I say something? Should I not say anything? What are people gonna think? There's also bullying. Girls are much more relational aggression. So it's social media posts, talking about you behind your back, turning people against each other, that kind of thing. And for the boys, sometimes somewhat relational, it's much more physical. Who am I going to leave out of the basketball game or the football game, right? Who am I going to not invite to the party or to come swim with us or whatever it is? And then I think there's issues that peers have with each other. So that's when you get into intimate partner violence. In high school, right? So late, middle, early high school, you have kids with physical abuse going on or emotional abuse between kids, learned behavior, right? So they're practicing some of what they've seen. Then once you get out of high school and get into college, I work with a group called the Healthy Minds Network, and we've looked at some data, all kinds of pressure. So these young people are dealing with making life choices about what kind of career am I going to pick. I shared, before about grades. What kind of grades am I getting? Those academic pressures. As well as peer relationships again still. But there's also all these things about race and culture that maybe many of our young people have not dealt with fully that really start to emerge in college. All the black kids sit together at one table, all the white kids, all the Asian kids, right? And what if you're multiracial? How do you deal with that? So there are those kinds of pressures. And then what happens to me if I'm not doing well in school? What kind of job am I gonna get? Job prospects. So as you're leaving college and emerging into young adulthood, there are the pressures around becoming an adult. What does it mean to be a real adult? For some of our young people nowadays, they have to move back home. Right? That feels like a failure.
Yes.
I'm not able to go out and be on my own. I'm not able to take care of myself. Those are pressures. And then there's sort of these dating and mating pressures. When you get out of college, everybody has this fantasy, I don't know where they get it from, that 1 or 2 years out of college, you're supposed to be married, right? And start having children. That's not everybody's path. That's not most people's path. So there are those kinds of issues around relationships. So there are lots of pressures. Many are a thread throughout, right? Academic, I think, is a thread. Peer relationships, those are a thread. For later adolescents going into young adulthood, those relationship pressures are a thread. And then for everybody, there's the family issues, right? Am I living up to my family standards? For those with mental health issues where they're open about it, am I going to have the same kind of mental health problems my parents had or my aunties and uncles had? So those are some of the things that our young people are struggling with from childhood all the way through early adulthood.
Why do they take it so seriously? Because I can remember, not just when I was a teen or when I was an undergrad, but also post-undergrad when I did juvenile work. The conversation of the day was a joke. It was to have fun, was the order of the day. But these kids today seem, at 15,
overwhelmed.
They're working full-time jobs, going to school full-time, and stressed about whether or not they'll be able to go to a good college or get a job when they get out. Where did that pressure flush in from?
Well, I think a lot of it has to do with our families, right? And so every generation wants the next generation to do better than they did. But now you have so much access. I feel like it's an overflowing cup, and not in a good way, right? We pour so much more into young people these days. We don't give them an outlet for it, right? So it's like that, it's like you keep pouring, it starts spilling over, but the person is still pouring. So all the things that you mentioned, I think they're so right on point, and I think they're so interesting, and they intrigue me because it's true, right? We want kids to, everybody needs to go to Harvard, right? Or everybody needs to go to the, I won't pick one, the HBCU that mom and dad went to, or, you know, or grandma went to, or uncle was the president of. You need to go there. Like, no other place is good enough.
And then once you get there, you must make lines.
That's it. You got to, and it has to be the right fraternity or sorority, right? You can't just be in any old, right? You need to be in this one.
The family legacy.
That's it, the family legacy. Or even to the point, I can remember kids, young people I went to undergrad with, where they came to Howard expressly to pledge Alpha chapter of that organization, because that's what mom and dad did. Do you know what I mean? So those are the kinds of pressures that our young people are dealing with. And I think it's so serious for them because, I don't know if it's more serious, I think there's more opportunities for discussion because you do have social media. Right? And so there's more opportunities for the conversation to happen, because what are the kids doing? They're tweeting, they're posting on Instagram, they're not on Facebook, that's what they tell me. Snapchat, right? So you have all these places where you can express what your pressures are. So I think the pressures are a little bit more because there's more, they're exposed to more, right?
And then as you said, we share
That's it, we share too much, we share it. So for our young people, this is what they're struggling with. Because they have social media, they get a lot more access to information. They have no mechanism for processing information that they shouldn't have because they're getting it at earlier and earlier ages.
Right.
And then we're sharing stress. So it's all of those things. That's why it's so serious for them.
Okay, so now tell me, let's talk about prevention.
Yes.
And let's look at it from two prongs.
Okay.
Let's look at it from the actual person.
Okay.
And what red flags they should see in themselves to make them take the next step as to getting to someone to talk to, and then as a community. Because recently the Turban story that broke in California, the 13 kids, and the neighbors said that they were none the wise, that the children were being held in the home.
Being tortured.
Yes, tortured, chained to their beds. You could take a shower only once a year.
Not feeding them.
So from the personal perspective, what responsibilities does a person have in the prevention?
So because we're talking about children and adolescents, I'll talk a little bit about what kids can do, teenagers, and I'm gonna talk about what the adults in their lives can do. What everybody can do, and I'm gonna try to be focused on the question that you asked me, is know what your baseline is. I tell everybody that everywhere I go. And what do I mean when I say that? Well, baseline is if I'm still and quiet and I'm having an okay day, how does that feel physically, right? What's going on inside me? What am I thinking about? Once you can establish your baseline, you can sort of figure out the range up and down of what's really good for you and what feels really bad for you. And if you're starting to feel really bad, that's when you know it's time to go reach out to some trusted adult, not just any old adult, a trusted adult to get help. That's what a young person can do, is know their baseline, right? But you gotta be still, which is hard for young people. So
because there's no place to be still.
There's no place to be still. So I tell people, if you have to go in the bathroom, close the door, turn the water on so people think you're like doing something, and you sit there for 15 or 5 minutes, do it. If you can only sit for a minute in the bathroom before somebody's banging and wants to come in, do that. But our young people have no place to be still, as you said, and they have nobody encouraging them to ask them to do it. So that's from an individual level. Yes. So from a community perspective, I think what we can do is we can become more aware. So shows like this, vitally important to give people a space to talk. That's one. The second is parents need to become knowledgeable about what these issues are. What are the signs and symptoms of depression? What are the signs and symptoms of anxiety? Those are the two biggest issues that our young people deal with. About a quarter of young people, regardless of race, are dealing with some form of anxiety in the United States. And as I said earlier, about 10%, regardless of race, are dealing with depression. What does depression look like in a teenager, right? If they go in the room and close the door, is that typical teenage behavior, or is my child depressed, right? So it's becoming aware. Again, it's not to call people ignorant. It is to say that we don't pay attention to these things. And so if we don't pay attention, we don't know when to go get help. And I think the biggest thing is we have to reduce stigma as a community. We have to stop telling people that just suck it up and get over it. We just stop saying that. We have to stop saying to teenagers, what you got to be worried about.
Time heals all wounds.
That's it. Time heals all. Just
Girl,
let
it'll
time
pass.
pass. That's it.
It'll pass.
Stop telling kids that, and stop telling kids what you got to be worried about. You don't pay no bills. You don't wash no clothes. You don't even clean up your room.
All
what
you got to do
be
is go to
upset
school
about?
and make good grades.
That's it. That's it. So we have to stop doing those kinds of things. And the stigma piece is huge. We have to stop saying people are crazy. We just, that's a bad word in our house. Unless we're joking around and talking.
Unfortunately.
That's it.
Because it's a word that I used to use very often.
Yes.
Because I liked, my personality
Yes.
is very sarcastic and funny.
Yes.
So people would often say, Anita, you so crazy.
But I think that's okay.
And I was cool with
Yes.
it. Now,
Yes.
you might say, we could be girls
Right.
and working together.
Right.
And you say, girl, Anita, you so crazy.
Right.
But then 2 cubes over, somebody's going, Anita's got a problem.
Right.
The term these days
Yes.
is, and nobody wants to dig in long enough to pay attention.
Right.
They only want to be fearful.
Right.
Which is harmful.
Right. I agree. And I think the other thing about going back to the example you gave, the analogy of somebody hears it and they think, I don't know. The other thing is that somebody who's struggling with something, who knows something's not right, internalizes that and is thinking, oh,
I better not say anything.
Are they saying this about me? Or, you know what I mean? And so I think in the sense of like wild behavior, right? You're having fun, or like you said, like you're joking around. I don't necessarily know that that's problematic, but when we use it to negatively stigmatize and label people.
Yes.
The person who's standing on the corner, right? We know in this area, we have people on different corners who do that. We don't call those people crazy, right? I tell my kids, that person is probably struggling with a mental illness, right? So the one final thing is, when we use the labels, we label behavior. We don't label people. So we say someone has a mental illness. We don't say that person is mentally ill.
That's deep.
We say that someone
That's
died by suicide. We try not to say, I learned this from a girlfriend who had a son die by suicide. She's a really close girlfriend, and he was 15 when he died by suicide. But I tell people, he died by suicide. We don't say he committed. He didn't want to do that. He died by, that was the way, you know what I mean? And so language is so powerful and so important. So I think those are some of the things we can do as a community to help destigmatize the illness and to encourage people to want to come on the show and talk about what's going on with them like this, or to want to go get help from a mental health professional. So those are some of the things I would say.
The other thing is, we need to again know our neighbors.
Yes. Yes.
Because
Yes.
nobody knows who lives next to them anymore.
No.
So don't wait for the holidays.
Yes.
Just stop by
Yes.
a
Yes.
7-Eleven,
Yes.
stop by a store,
Yes.
pick up about 10 postcards,
Yes.
and just mail them
Oh,
to
that's
all the houses
wonderful.
up and down your
That's a
street.
lovely idea.
Hi, my name is Anita.
Yes.
I'm your neighbor that lives in so-and-so. This
Yes.
is my regular schedule.
Yes. Yes.
Here if you need me.
Yes, absolutely, absolutely. Or even go outside when you see your neighbor outside going in. Make it a on purpose accident, right? To run into the person. If they're outside getting their mail out of the mailbox, you come outside and hey, how you doing?
Hey, Miss Sage.
Yes. Just so that people are aware. So I think the more we can do that, you do create more of a sense of community. Because as you said, when we migrate and we move away from our loved ones, it's important to create what we call fictive kin, right? They may not be related by blood, but we want them to be kin because we share a community. So I think your ideas are wonderful.
If the pressure in your life is becoming overwhelming, reach out for help. I cannot employ to you more. Reach out for help. We have all been there and had to learn how to manage and cope with life. It's okay that you're going through it. We will help you live through it, whether it's fear, anxiety, low self-esteem, or even suicidal thoughts. You can call the National Suicide Prevention Hotline at 1-800-273-8255. That's 1-800-273-8255. You can reach out to Dr. Alfiee. She's on Twitter at Dr. Alfiee. We're here for you because I know sometimes we don't want to be fixed, we just want to be heard. Make the commitment to start your journey to emotional healing today. I'm Anita, your host. Be sure to check out thatanitalive.com for where and when to see our next episode.